Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I am Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Rocketman. Rena, can you give us a trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of substance abuse, homophobia, eating disorders, suicide attempts, and emotional abuse, and partner-on-partner violence. Sarah, can you think of anything else?
If you're not a fan of outlandish costumes that make people look like Muppets, this will also be a really upsetting movie for you. And Rena, do we have any spoilers?
Sarah, we spoil everything. Consider yourself warned.
Wanted to share just a couple of sources up top that we will also be sharing in the show notes that we referred to in informing our decision-making around this episode. First is an article, Was Elton John's manager, John Reid, really such a jerk? From the website ultimateclassicrock.com. The book Scattershot by Bernie Taupin, Me by Elton John, Rocketman, The Life of Elton by Mark Bago, and Captain Fantastic, Elton John's Stellar Trip Through the 70s by Tom Doyle.
Yes, there's been a lot of enjoyable writing about Elton John's life in the 70s, and I wasn't able to work portions of everything that I wanted to into the episode, but some anecdotes that I particularly liked were when Bernie Taupin writes in Scattershot that his father was of French extraction, and the only person ever to pronounce his name correctly under the French pronunciation was Frank Sinatra, who sang an Elton John Bernie Taupin song, but said, this song is by Bernard Tau-PAHN. Sinatra, he appreciated artists. Like, he was someone who was more about the grand gesture than about treating other people well. Also, there's a long story in Elton John's Me that is also mentioned in at least one other book about the time that he and John Lennon went on a coke binge at the Sherry Netherland, and Andy Warhol was pounding on their door. So first they thought it was police, and then Elton John looked outside and saw Andy Warhol pounding on the door, and then John Lennon said, no, don't let him in. He's going to have his Polaroid camera on him, and he's going to take tons of photos of us with icicles of cocaine up our noses. So they just let Andy Warhol keep pounding on the door and didn't let him in.
I also love that story because, as we've discussed in previous episodes, Andy Warhol is a vampire, and I love when someone is like, you know what? Vampire can't come to our party.
Taron Egerton does a good job doing John Lennon's Liverpool accent whenever John Lennon pops up in Me, and he does most of the reading from that. So imagine him saying, with icicles of cocaine up our noses, but in that accent. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about Elton John and Rocketman?
From Wikipedia, Sir Elton Hercules John, who was born Reginald Kenneth Dwight on March 25th, 1947, is a British singer, songwriter, and pianist. Acclaimed by critics and musicians, particularly for his work during the 1970s and for his lasting impact on the music industry, his music and showmanship have had a significant impact on popular music. His songwriting partnership with lyricist Bernie Taupin is one of the most successful in history. Rocketman, the film, is a 2019 biographical jukebox musical drama film based on the life, music and career of Elton John. It was directed by Dexter Fletcher and written by Lee Hall. And the film tells the story of John in his early days in England as a prodigy at the Royal Academy of Music through his musical partnership with Bernie Taupin. The story is told through his music and titled after John's 1972 song Rocketman. The film stars Taron Egerton as Elton John, also Jamie Bell as Bernie Taupin, Richard Madden as John Reed, and Bryce Dallas Howard as Sheila Eileen, Elton John's mother. Rocketman premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2019 and was theatrically released later on that year. It grossed $195 million worldwide and received positive reviews from critics and a lot of praise for Taron Egerton's performance.
You may be curious to know if we plan to knock accuracy points off because in real life people don't burst into song. The answer is no, because that would be pedantic and cynical. I am happy to accept the scenes where people burst into song as a storytelling metaphor to display the character's emotional state. One of the things that I've missed in much of the modern musical is people bursting into song. I think that there is the idea that modern audiences are too jaded and suspicious to accept characters singing unless it's framed as a metaphor, something going on in their heads, or part of a performance that they're giving within the plot of the film. On this note, I found the Tim Burton Sweeney Todd frustrating because they cut my favorite song, except for use as background music. I waited the entire film for a grand chorus of dirty-faced Londoners to bust out with "Attend the Tale of Sweeney Todd," and the release that would come with that big rousing chorus number, and it never happened. As a result, I did not enjoy the Tim Burton Sweeney Todd.
I also did not care for the Tim Burton Sweeney Todd because I hate Johnny Depp and he's a trash monster who should not be working in the legitimate film industry.
I think that the current popularity of musical biopics is because audiences miss musicals but don't know it. They want familiar, tuneful, singable songs and characters that they know, and musical biopics are filling the space created by the decline of Broadway. When Broadway soundtracks topped the charts, audiences could go into the film already knowing and maybe having sung along to the songs. Hamilton is the exception to the rule for modern show music, most of modern show music being, and I'm worried you'll be mad at me for this, Sarah, somewhat esoteric to theater fans.
I can respect that point of view. Sondheim has been reigning supreme on Broadway of late, and he is absolutely not approachable in the same way that Rodgers and Hammerstein are. There is a story on the PBS Ken Burns Broadway doc about how men going off to World War II would get the chance to see Oklahoma or another show before they left, and how they were really inspired to go fight for America. And the same thing wouldn't happen with Here We Are, which is wonderful and weird, and Sondheim's last show. And I loved it, but it was weird. And if someone sees assassins before they're supposed to ship off to fight in a war, they're going to go AWOL. So I get it.
Musical biopics fill the hole left by the decline of the Broadway musical in pop culture. We know and love our rock, pop, name your genre music stars. We're a little familiar with their stories, and we accept the filmic framing devices because we want to see big production numbers of songs that we like. When I watch a musical, I'm making a choice to put my cynicism to the side, let go of my modernist irony, and just, sit back and enjoy it. If you're still listening, thank you for humoring me by bearing with my digressions, Sarah. I'm worried that you want to murder me for implying that post-West Side Story Sondheim is esoteric to theater audiences.
I'd never. It's not for everyone, and everything he did was anywhere from 15 to 20 to 40 years ahead of its time. And to be clear, I adore Stephen Sondheim. Before we jump into the world's most improbable 12-step meeting, what is your personal experience with Elton John?
Well, Rocketman is a film that I've watched at least several times, And it has the rare distinction of being a film that I learned something from, where what I learned from it improved me as a person. And that came from one of the title cards that I saw moving into the closing credits, where it says that Elton John and Bernie Taupin have still never had an argument. I was shocked at this because it appeared to me that Elton and Bernie spent the second half of the movie fighting. And that was how I learned that the rest of the human race sees a difference between a disagreement and an argument or a fight, and that I don't naturally draw any emotional distinction between a disagreement and a fight. Rocketman taught me that the rest of the world does draw a distinction, and when my emotions immediately dial up during a disagreement, I need to take my emotions, shove them in a box, and ignore them for the sake of having a healthy social interaction. So I would say that Rocketman changed me for the better as a person.
Damn. I don't know how I feel about the shoving the feelings in the box thing, but I do agree with you that there is a difference between a disagreement and a fight. I would also say that most of the arguments or disagreements that they had were more Elton yelling at Bernie and him kind of being really calm in response. So I was wondering, is it a fight if one person is being completely rational and taking actions to keep things rational while the other person is yelling at them? But I mean, that's a good lesson. I love Elton John. Tumbleweed Connection is one of my favorite albums in the history of ever. And I love a lot of his 70s stuff, but I also love the 80s stuff and the 90s stuff. And I appreciate very much like what he has done over the years. It's not all for me, but it's excellent. And he is prolific as an artist and has created a lot of things that people love. I also want to add that, despite the way he frames himself in this film, from the jump, he is a legitimately good person in that he has used his power for the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which he founded in 1992. He raised $70 million for the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund. And he has also been personally generous to many people. My first introduction to him as a human being, beyond like a voice on the radio, was when he was connecting with Ryan White, the young boy who got AIDS from a blood transfusion. He personally connected with Ryan and his family, and engaged with them as a human, and was a pallbearer at Ryan White's funeral. And he at one point loaned Ryan White's mother $16,000 to put a down payment on a new home. And he refused repayment. She did repay him ultimately, and he took that money and immediately put it into a college fund for Ryan White's sister. And I would say also, I found this movie personally so delightful. It was one of those movies that I felt like was made for me. And I am delighted by the idea that this is exactly the movie that Elton John wanted it to be.
He's incredibly honest about his life, and one of the things that he talks about in the book is why he thinks he didn't get AIDS. He says that one of the things that he liked to do was use cocaine to seduce straight men, but also what he liked to do was to use drugs to get lots of other people who would not normally have sex with each other to have sex with each other, and then he would watch. And he thinks that this is a big reason why he never got AIDS.
Shit, that's very honest.
Yeah, and an utterly tasteless follow-up to a story about Ryan White.
Indeed. Should we talk through some of the key points in the film and kind of walk through the journey of this motion picture?
Yes.
Great. So I mentioned that we open on a 12-step meeting where Elton shows up dressed as a rainbow griffon or Satan or something, and no one cares because it is a 12-step meeting. And he immediately identifies himself as a bulimic, a shopaholic, a rageaholic, and an addict. And I loved this structure. It works really well in telling this story. It sets sort of the stage for this movie to be a giant musical gay fantasia. And I can't ask for more in a movie than having it open with a man in a griffin costume, immediately followed by a child singing "The Bitch Is Back."
So I had a rather different take on the rehab meeting framing device than you did. For me, it required more willing suspension of disbelief than people bursting into song in a musical, because even if one of the biggest celebrities in the planet is talking about themselves and their dirty secrets, I refuse to believe that the other patients at this rehab facility would put up with one guy going on about himself for 2 hours, because alcoholics and addicts are some of the most self-absorbed people on the planet. And there's no way all that would go on without someone interjecting about their own life. And I tried to rationalize this. I realized that later on, at one point, to show that he's like letting go, he breaks the devil horns off the costumes. And then eventually you see him sitting there in a bathrobe. And so maybe this is occurring over multiple sessions. I can't believe they would just let one guy go on about himself for 2 hours. And that might be pedantic of me. I know.
Listen, this is our show. We can have opinions.
Then they cut back to his childhood and a very delightful rendition of "The Bitch Is Back." Also, like, little boy Elton is in the rehab room with his bicycle. And at this point I was like, ooh, inner child, paging trope Navajo. But we cut to the big dance number in this 1950s British town that is, like, at the beginning kind of like that washed out grayish shade that we think of when we think of post-war Britain and empire fully drained. But I love the way that Bryce Dallas Howard is dressed as his mother in her opening scene. I love 50s wardrobe. I love big poofy skirts and like fit and flares. And it's one of my favorite silhouettes. And it's really the last time that you feel any like glory or charm in the ritual of women putting themselves together. In the scenes where the character is young, she just has a body like poured ivory. And I didn't realize that it was her at all. I also didn't recognize Emma Jones as Reggie's grandmother, but she is one of those British actresses who has been around forever, and one of it, like, their faces pop up still, and it's like an old friend from my parents' Masterpiece Theater VHS tapes. And she was in a show called The Duchess of Duke Street in the 70s. She's terrific, and I loved seeing her.
And I really liked Bryce Dallas Howard in this movie. I know she is Nepo baby par excellence, but I do feel like she as a human has taken a lot of responsibility for trying to pull up the next generation of filmmakers and people who are less on third base than she is, and support them through educational initiatives. I like her a lot as an actor, and I like her in this movie.
I have sympathy for her because, as an example of how fucked up Hollywood is, I read that Bryce Dallas Howard has a hard time finding stylists to dress her and designers to loan her clothes for award shows and premieres because, OMG, she's a size 8. So nothing is in her size, and nobody wants to dress an enormous size 8 woman, which is fucked up.
And she's radiant in this movie. She's a very beautiful woman. She's a woman. We find out that his dad is in the military and he's only home periodically. I didn't love the way his parents are portrayed in this film. They're very one-dimensional and they're mean. And maybe that's how they were, but I have mixed feelings personally on the villain edit on Dead Parents. And, you know, they sing the song "I Want Love," which is a later Elton John song. His dad is shown as distant and broken, and his mom is kind of a petulant slut, and neither of them know how to love their child. And it's worth noting that his parents were born in the middle of a multi-generation feeding of working class men to the war machine. And I don't want to excuse it. Some people just suck at parenting.
When I read the autobiography, his parents come across as more fully dimensional human beings. And there's this scene of little Reggie plucking at the piano, and the mom and the grandmom both, like, their jaws drop. So it's apparent that he's a prodigy from very early on.
Yeah, he has an ear. He can sight hear. I don't know how else to describe that, but he can hear music and then play it back. He auditions for and is accepted into the Royal Academy of Music.
His teacher at the Royal Academy of Music, I need to report a Harriet Walter sighting. She's been in a period where she plays like every woman over 60 in everything, but she's fantastic in all of it, and she has this Scottish accent in this.
Yes, I was excited to see her, and his dad leaves after his mom is caught cheating on his dad with his soon-to-be stepfather. Elton, he's still Reggie at this point. He begins performing and he starts singing Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. I miss Trope Navajo's guidance here because I was so excited to see singing and dancing, but it does that thing where it swings the camera around and all of a sudden it's Taron Egerton has grown up.
The exact way that they do this, Sarah, and I was tracking it for Trope Navajo, was that teenaged Elton goes through a hole in a fence, comes out the other side. You don't see it quite clearly, but then you see they've subbed in Taron Egerton.
It's really well done for the trope. And right away here, your creative energy of this film, how it's all sort of shown, like the way he remembers things and weaves his music into it in this really, really clever way. And it feels like Elton John has been preparing to make this very movie his entire life. And his music has always been very cinematic and very montage ready. And it's really well deployed in a lot of movies. Dog Day Afternoon, Almost Famous, The Ice Storm, all have really iconic moments using Elton John music. He then next goes to a record company and he meets the fabulous Stephen Graham, who's a character actor who's been in a lot of things. He has a very 1930s face. And he plays some music for him, and he's handed some lyrics to put to that music, and it's the lyrics to Border Song by Bernie Taupin. And they meet in person and instantly connect.
One thing I wanted to bring up here was in these scenes with the publisher guy, he starts to play Candle in the Wind, and I went out of my head looking to find evidence that this was something that he'd thought of at the time and then forgotten. And there's nothing for that. And there's another part where the music publisher guy is asking, well, what else have you written? And he starts playing snatches of things that he wouldn't write for years. I thought, I just need to ignore this. Let's get on with the movie. So, yeah, he meets Bernie Taupin, and it is instant romance. And they go on this 18-hour walk all over London where you see the sun coming up. Their bromance is far more convincing than Genghis Khan and Jamuka in The Conqueror.
That's the only other sort of long-term male friendship we've seen portrayed so far in this project. And I really appreciated seeing the way that their relationship rolled out over the years in this, and felt like Bernie was kind of the hero of this film in a lot of ways, because he's a really good partner and a good friend and a kind spirit to Elton as he's going through all of the things that he goes through. And also that Bernie didn't care that he was gay, which had to not be an entirely easy way to be in the late 60s in the UK. And he was completely comfortable being around him in a way that probably was unique, and he was really accepting of him as the person that he was.
It's a beautiful relationship, and you see Bernie Taupin performing a lot of emotional labor and not resenting it.
They attempt to move out and move into an apartment building together. Elton is speaking with some performers who he toured with earlier in the film and had his first gay experience with. And they're speaking with a couple of these folks, and one of them says, "But you're gay," when he tells him that he has a girlfriend. He has to go home and break up with the girl. And as a result, Bernie and Elton move in with Sheila and his stepdad. And we just see them grinding out their artistic process and working and working and working. And it's a good thing to show on film, and they show it really well, how hard you work to create things. And that's what real artists do, is they sit down and they do the work.
The ability to write a song is this wondrous thing for me, whereas not getting how do you put words together is like a big and seeing how they work, that like Elton needs Bernie's words and then the music comes to him from seeing them, is just like a through the looking glass form of mental being for me.
And here's where we see them hammering out Your Song, which would become their breakout song. And then we head to Los Angeles, to the Troubadour.
I also noticed that Bernie shifts between calling him Reg and calling him Elton. And they're in the bathroom where Elton has the first of his famous panic attack tantrums. And then Bernie is pleading with him, and then one of the record label guys comes and yells at him. And he just gets over it. Like, he needed to throw a fit to get it out of his system, which is how some people are. But I love the Troubadour sequence. I love how it's shot. I love the judicious use of slow-mo, like when everyone's jumping up and down and you see all the platform shoes airborne. I love the way Taron Egerton does that flying kick leap while his hands are still on the piano playing Crocodile Rock, and how they just slow it down and move around him to like la 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 la. And this is a case where I am a massive fan of letting the actor do the singing, because I think Egerton's vocal chops are equal to it. You have to have someone who, first off, Elton John's vocal range when he was young was about 3.1 octaves. I looked it up, which is comparable to someone like Beyonce.
I'm not the hugest Crocodile Rock fan, but I came away from this scene in love with that song because of the way they did this, the slow-mo, the moment where he flies into the air. What I felt like they were doing was really showing you what it feels like to connect with an audience, and what that sort of that moment of zen is when you are in the zone and your audience is in the zone with you. And to your point about the soundtrack, I felt like he managed to both evoke Elton John while also making the music his own a bit. Like, he's allowed to act in this. It doesn't feel like an imitation.
Midway through this, in the audience, we see Rob Stark. I'm just going to refer to this actor as Rob Stark, because my thing with this actor is that I confuse his name with the American football player who has a bunch of video games. Just too many Richards and Johns and Robs and Tom, Harry, and Dicks. And so I'm just going to refer to him and his character as Rob Stark until I get tired of it. And actually, he does a very good job trying to create a three-dimensional portrayal where the way that the character is scripted He's basically walking into a red wedding to get multiple dimensions out of this character. It kind of simplifies who is good and who is bad in a way. I can't decide whether to call John Reed a cad or a fuckboy, but everyone goes to a party at Mama Cass's, and it's fabulous. And Bernie meets this beautiful, towering creature with this nimbus of hair named Heather. And Elton is walking through a party where he's in a room and then an outdoor space full of heterosexual people in heterosexual couples displaying love, attraction, and it is the loneliest feeling in the world to have that sense that nothing around you, nothing in the culture that you're seeing reflected around you was created for you. And he sings Tiny Dancer, and when Bernie goes off with this girl, it's this thing that happens in a friendship when one person falls in love and the other doesn't, where there's this sort of like romantic friendship phenomena that happens when you're young, especially, where you have a crush on someone and you don't want to have sex with them. You just think they're amazing and there's this delicious, warm intensity between you and you love every second with them and you want to be like them, but you don't want to sleep with them necessarily. But the platonic romantic friendship shrinks in the face of finding something real. And there's nothing at this fabulous party that's about him. And here comes Robb Stark. And once again, I am in awe at the gaydar of men who lived through pre-Stonewall. He shows up and he's wearing this well-fitted suit and he has these baby blue eyes to die for and this sexy as hell Scottish accent, and he's carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon and talking about the vintage. And Reg Dwight doesn't know that John Reed is a dropout who was the son of a welder, and he's putting on an act too. It immediately makes Robb Stark powerful. But actually, this is the most power that Elton is going to have in the history of the whole relationship, because John Reed is pitching himself to Elton here. John Reed doesn't know that Elton is Reg Dwight and that he's a bundle of insecurities. What he's seen is this powerful, hot rock star who flew around the stage. He's fallen in love with the badass rock star and doesn't realize that he's pitching himself to insecure Reg Dwight, and they're incompatible. It's the one part where Robb Stark gets that character to the full 3 dimensions. And they have a sex scene where they're both so excited and it just feels like it's taking, you know, this feeling like, God, it's taking forever to get, these belts are so intense with all these buckles, it's taking us forever to get our pants off.
I want to point out first that the football player that you are referring to is John Madden.
Too many Johns and Richards. I can't do it. And Maddens. And can't do it. Will always be Robb Stark.
I know. He's so dreamy. And he is so much dreamier than the real John Reed. And this is a good point to pick up the thread that Dexter Fletcher directed this. And he picked up and finished Bohemian Rhapsody when Bryan Singer got fired / walked into his trailer and did coke for 3 weeks and forgot about the world, or whatever garbage thing happened there. Dexter Fletcher came in and finished that movie, and he made this film. And there was an opportunity here to have a super fun shared cinematic universe, because John Reed also fucked over Freddie Mercury. So you have 2 villain edits of this man played by 2 different Game of Thrones actors, because he's played by Aidan Gillen in Bohemian Rhapsody, who are both way more attractive than he could ever have dreamed of being. And it's a missed opportunity for sure to do like a whole lot of world building. Obviously, there's 2 sides to every story, but he must have sucked.
Well, IRL, John Reed was quite pugilistic. It was an era when music managers were tough guys who did not have degrees from top schools. Like all the guys in these stories who are music managers, they were all like teenagers who dropped out and walked into a music office. And it's like, really? Because now they've interviewed 20 people from your job who possibly have a better diploma than you. And it's crazy that like that was how it was then. Peter Grant, Led Zepp guy, they were all guys who cursed and punched people.
The sex scene between Taron and Richard Madden was apparently the first male gay sex scene in a major studio release, according to the IMDb trivia, which I thought was super interesting. That's, you know, that took to the year of our Lord 2019 to happen in a movie. It's sparkly and hot, like the two of them. They're good looking dudes.
Yeah, I don't care. I just see two beautiful people together in a bed. I don't see what the problem is here.
I never thought of Elton John as a sex symbol, because as I mentioned, my first introduction to him as a human was during the Ryan White era. Watching this and watching Taron Egerton play him, I was like, Elton John is hot.
Elton wants Rob Stark to come to London with him, and immediately they're not on the same page. And then we have a fabulously choreographed success montage.
Oh, the success montage.
Well, you sense that the crowd is filling the hole within him and that he's loving it. They record Don't Go Breaking My Heart, which I love you, Elton, but I've always found it kind of annoying. Sorry.
It's okay. It's kind of a song in search of a yogurt advertising campaign. You don't have to like everything to appreciate the output. He fires Stephen Graham, and Stephen Graham exits the movie, which is a huge bummer because love Stephen Graham.
Yes, and Stephen Graham's assistant, who was the one who pretended to be the guy interviewing them when they came in originally, says a line that I will subsequently cite when we get to choice dialogue, which was, "Your very expensive painting is upside down," because he just bought a very expensive painting in the success montage.
At this point, he comes out to both of his parents, and his dad is really shitty to him when he comes out to his dad.
See, I thought that he didn't even get around to saying anything to the dad because the dad was being so shitty that he just left.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, he didn't even really...
He sees the dad giving his little half-brothers that he has no relationship with all of this warmth and affection that was never there for him. And then John Reed is a horrible boyfriend and makes him call his mom, who makes everything worse. Like, oh yes, I figured that out a long time ago. And then she's like, oh, but you're going to be so lonely, darling. No one's ever going to love you properly, which I think is a reflection of how homosexuality was seen. Like, I've grown up in a reality where, even when there were only civil unions, you saw gay people being able to make plans to like form families and buy houses.
The scene is brutal because she basically says that he's choosing a life of never being loved, as if it's a choice. And then I have a note here, ugh, John Reed sucks, because John punches him due to the dialed up drama of this entire situation. And it's horrible.
And because John is now thinking like his business manager who needs him to get to the Royal Albert Hall and be in the metallic chicken outfit like 15 minutes ago. There was no reason to have him go make those house calls that day specifically. He could have done it any time in the next few months. Somewhere in here there's a chair throw, and abusive furniture is one of the tropes of these films where you expect to see Jim Morrison's headcanon Navajo show up whenever just inanimate objects really take it hard.
He's starting to do cocaine before performances. He's dressed like a Muppet. We have a sequence set to the song Pinball Wizard, which is a song that Elton John really made his own as a result of his performance in the movie Tommy. This scene I felt like also really did a really great job demonstrating like what it must be like to be on cocaine.
This is a terrible couple because Rob Stark sees this as a business relationship with benefits where he gets stuck with a lot of unplanned emotional labor, and Elton sees it as a love relationship where he's not getting what he needs from the other person.
When you're managing someone or you're representing them, you end up kind of in a codependent bond in the best of circumstances. So I don't know what Rob Stark thought managing Elton John was going to be like.
Oh, I know what Rob Stark was thinking. He was thinking that he was going to be managing that guy he saw kicking his legs up at the Troubadour, and they'd get to have sex too. There are some rapid costume changes, and Elton wakes up in bad shape in LA, wanders down to the pool to see John Reed getting a blowjob from a random young man, and Elton immediately breaks up with Rob Stark, who acts like this has happened many times before, and his mom and his stepdad show up. There's a big party. Bernie shows up with some girls, and Elton is being no fun, which makes sense given the amount of chemicals he's just come to from. I also wanted to note they do a really good job making the thinning hair convincing until right around the end of the picture.
It's subtle. It slowly creeps back.
And he takes a bunch of pills, and God, there are so many pills in this house. He falls into the pool, and this is the sequence when they sing Rocketman, where I love the choreography on this. We have a trope Navajo moment where he sees the little inner child in a space helmet with a little piano singing to him at the bottom of the pool. And then you see all these swimmers coming down to save him. Paramedics arrive really quickly. I don't know if he's supposed to be in Malibu or Beverly Hills. I've heard that their paramedic service is remarkably fast. They don't have to deal with 911 is a joke at all. But also, the choreography that I love later, he's in some kind of hangar that's behind the stage where they like propel him up into the air after they pump out his stomach, and you just see him being lifted and moved out onto the stage. And yeah, I find this sequence very artfully staged. I've rewound it and dissected it about 5 times or so. I love the little like ouch look that Taron gets on his face when they hit him with the needle before marching him on stage. And he just plasters this grin on and comes out for everybody and hits that baseball, which he's an Englishman. He must have needed to work on that. But just this sense of you stick the pieces back together and you move them around.
Yeah, this really did heavy lifting in a really artful way around the balance of like that incredible loneliness and pain that he was experiencing and like the depravity of addiction, and then having to go out and perform and hold it together, and just that sort of back and forth of his experience where he's in theory the least lonely person in the world because he's surrounded by tens of thousands of fans, and then is back in the bottom of the pool with baby Reggie.
But at the end of the Dodger Stadium suicide scene sequence, they sort of propel him up into the air on the plane where Bernie is saying he needs to take a break and cool off, and invites Elton. And it's one of these things where where I could see Elton is thinking about that time that Bernie left him alone at the party so he could run off with Heather, and now he's getting Bernie back for abandoning him at this party where he goes on to meet this awful, emotionally abusive guy, and Bernie has no clue that that's what it goes back to. And you get another performance montage where you see him in that famous Elizabeth I outfit, and he's being obnoxious to the audience, and the band makes this face like, oh no, that is straight out of how the Doors react to Jim Morrison. And there's some debauchery montage where you see the inner child and the dad looking on disapprovingly from inside his head. Cut to time has passed. His records aren't selling, and he's mad at Robb Stark. And horrible as he's being, I felt some sympathy for Robb Stark, because you get the sense that emotionally managing this guy is a lot of work.
I can't imagine the emotional labor of managing a drug addicted Elton John. And then we see him deciding to marry this woman, Renata. It's a weird digression in sort of pop culture history, and it's a really weird choice for him, and their marriage is DOA.
He does not look happy to be at this wedding, and Robb Stark looks like he doesn't care. And you see them walking out of separate bedrooms, and Elton drinking a giant screwdriver at breakfast. It's flashback to rehab, where these very put-upon people who couldn't get a word in 2 hours at their frickin' rehab meeting are still listening to this guy.
The first 2/3 of this are so propulsive that it felt like the movie kind of slowed down a little bit here, because he just gets into fight after fight with people he cares about. He goes out to dinner with his mother, and she's just so disappointed in him for this marriage not working out, and tells him that she's incredibly disappointed with him. If 1980s Elton John, with all that he had accomplished, could disappoint his mother, that's a tough crowd.
They've finally started putting old age makeup on Bryce Dallas Howard here. It looks like she spent too much time in the sun, because they have her go freckly. I'm not too crazy about how they did the old age makeup, but they barely age her at all for about 20 years of time out of the film. And she wants a villa in Menorca so that she can ignore him killing himself. He's pushing people away. He meets Bernie. There's another blow up. He's testing people, and it's not healthy. There's a scene where I wrote down, great bulimia, more cocaine. He has a heart attack, and you have the sense that John Reed, in exasperation, is milking him to earn every cent that he can of that commission before his client finally drops dead.
I was really affected by the bulimia sequence, because bulimia is a super violent act to commit upon oneself. It's like cutting or any other act of real self-harm. Seeing it just that once was really effective. He's about to go out on stage, and he's about to do cocaine before he goes out on stage, and he's putting on the devil outfit that he is wearing when he arrives at rehab, and he realizes that it's time for him to stop. And he gets up in this costume, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is playing, and he's singing, and he leaves in that outfit to go to rehab.
Confess. You talk about the black box scene, and then I will talk about the reaction I had that I noted.
We are now on the same timeline where he is in rehab, and he's finishing his comments at this meeting to where he got to today. And we have this moment where, as a point of reference, I describe this in my head as sort of the black box episode of Family Ties. Where each of these people is showing up, and he's confronting them with how he is going to navigate their relationships going forward, and how he is going to accept who they are and what they are to him.
So is the black box sequence supposed to be in Elton John's head?
I think it's in his head, or he's saying all of this stuff and imagining them there. When I was watching this movie, and watching it the way everyone should watch it, which is on the back of a seat in a plane, I saw this sequence and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to kill Rena, because this is all the things she hates.
Elton is there like the baby Jim Morrison that shows up at the end of the doors, and the baby Aretha that you see in Respect, and on and on. Child self equals, look, I've learned to love myself now in these movies. And I saw baby Elton coming in, said out loud to the screen, "Don't hug the inner child." And he hugged the inner child.
It felt unnecessary for him to need to make peace with those parts of himself, because I felt like the movie accomplished that without it. Yeah. Bernie comes to see him at rehab, and they plan their next moves. And Bernie hands him lyrics to the song "I'm Still Standing." And he sits down at the piano and he starts composing that song. And I think, first of all, I think this is a dope song. And I love that he dresses like himself for the first time in a music video. It's still costumey, but it's him. It's not him as a Muppet or as a Griffin or Queen Elizabeth. It's just him and letting himself be himself. And
costumes on this were done by the same team that did Bohemian Rhapsody. And there are over 40 people listed in the costume credits. In addition to Julian Day, Bob Mackie gets a credit for designs based on. And so where does John Reed fit with Ted the Pimp and G in the pantheon of terrible romantic partner / business associates?
I mentioned up top that John Reed is also in Bohemian Rhapsody. My response to that question is, how bad of a person are you if you get a villain arc in 2 different movies in 1 calendar year, and your lead character walks away from that villain in triumph to one of their best songs in Act 3, which happens in both of these movies? That's a bad dude. John Reed has the distinction of fucking over 2 of the most important artists in rock music. I think that he was a very different kind of vampire predator than, your more straightforward one in fucking Ted, or in the pederast that was Doolittle. But I mean, he's clearly like a bad dude, and he clearly did a lot of harm to these 2 artists and took from them. Oh, I have some choice dialogue.
Choice dialogue. Choice dialogue. Choice dialogue.
So I loved, there's a line early on when Stephen Graham is talking to them, and he says, "Write me tunes that gray-haired old tramps will whistle in the street." And I loved that line.
So the choice dialogue that I wrote down included, "I could just take these songs and leave if you like. In 20 years, we have never had a single argument. She's killed my piano." And one from Stephen Grant. "Let him know who you are. Put on a great fucking show. And just don't kill yourself with drugs." And then the one I cited before. "Your very expensive painting is upside down. Lovely guy is not a job." And my final 2, both from the awful relationship with Rob Stark. "Rock and roll is not shagging your secretary in front of the pool boys." And "I'll still be collecting 20% long after you've killed yourself."
This movie. Do we want to do our rankings?
Ratings time. For outward appearances, I gave it an 8.75. Like I said, great job at getting the thinning hair down. I felt like when they started doing a little bit of early old age makeup on his forehead, they didn't quite get it right.
I give it a 9. I agree with all the points you made, and yeah, it's difficult to. Old age makeup is always tricky. But I thought that they really nailed it with the hair and makeup. Acting and casting, do they capture the spirit of the people they are playing? And beyond that, is the acting good? I gave this a 9. I loved Taron Egerton's performance. He is excellent in this movie. He embodied the character, but also didn't imitate him, which I think is a really fine line that actors need to walk when they make these movies. I loved Jamie Bell as Bernie Taupin. I forgot until I was reading the background that Elton John wrote the music for Billy Elliot on stage, and that was where Jamie Bell got his start. So he's probably known Jamie Bell for a very long time. John Madden was very good. Bryce Dallas Howard, as I mentioned, was really wonderful. The children and that they got to play Elton as he aged when he was Reggie were just incredibly well matched. Really good casting of younger versions of him.
For acting and casting, I gave it a 10. I thought everyone did a fantastic job. I don't know if there was anyone in this where their singing was dubbed, and I don't care because I'd rather that someone swallow their ego and lip sync if they have a shitty voice, and that they hire someone who can actually sing. Passage of time, 7.5. There were parts where I wasn't quite sure of how much time was passing or what year it was.
I gave it a 9, but I ding it for the same reasons, where there were just times where I was like, well, I vaguely recall that it was the late 80s that he married Renata, and things like that. But costuming, I gave it a 10. I mean, just they nailed it. They recreated things so flawlessly. It was a beautiful looking movie, right down to the shoes, which shoes were really important to Elton John.
I gave it a 9.5. Yeah, gorgeously done. Everything looked real. It fit right in with that time period. Everything with Elton John wore was identifiable with him.
Quality of the script, I gave it a 7. As I mentioned, the last third, the momentum slows quite a bit. And
for quality of the script, I gave it an 8. There were some zingers in there, and yeah, there were weaknesses. For accuracy, I gave it a 5.
Same, 5. But for storytelling, was it cliched, interesting, inventive? I gave it a 9. I liked the framing devices. I loved the way that the music was woven in and how it reflected so much of kind of his inner self.
For storytelling, I gave it a 7 because I don't like seeing inner children personified. I did not take to the use of spending 2 hours telling your story at one rehab meeting.
Production value, I gave it a 9. You saw all that money on the screen, and they didn't have comparatively a ton of it. To say that $35 million isn't a ton of money is kind of absurd, but in terms of how much movies cost to make these days, that's a pretty small budget for what they were able to pull off in the look and feel of the film.
For production value, I gave it a 10. Yeah, you could see where the money was, and everything was done in a way that felt authentic and that also felt authentically luxurious. And when they needed to be authentic to the economic misery of post-war Britain and the slow emergence from that, they were authentic to that too. Production, direction, decision-making, I gave a 7, again, reflecting my attitude towards inner children and the rehab framing device.
I gave it an 8 for just, that closing of him talking to each of the people in the Alex P. Keaton black box set. It felt like just a little bit too much. But I think that a lot of really good decisions were made in terms of the way this was shot and the way that it looked and where the money went. And finally, for Do We Care? I gave this a 9.
Me too. I also gave it a 9 for Do We Care. I cared a lot.
Yeah. And it closed with a really nice montage of photos of him and his children and his partner, David Furnish, who was also really involved in the making of the movie. And his, relationship with Bernie continues to this day. And I felt like I cared going into it, but he made me care about him even more deeply.
My total came to 8.275.
Mine was an 8.4.
So the final score average comes to 8.3375. So this qualifies for second opinion.
Second Opinion is a feature where we look at reviews that have appeared on IMDb about the film that disagree with our take, and it is blatantly stolen from How Did This Get Made?
Yeah. And we wanted to mention, since we forgot to do this at the top, that Rocketman was part of our Pride Month series. Our first Second Opinion, rating 1 out of 10. Utter garbage by Paul Clark 75 on March 2nd of 2021. I must admit that, being a massive fan of Elton's music, I was a bit apprehensive about this film, but I had free tickets. What I saw was the biggest load of rubbish I have ever seen, and the top contender for the worst film of all time. Awful in every way. Acting, singing, script, tragic self-pitying storyline. Music hall prattle. It actually made me angry. It was so bad. So, Sarah, what do you think of this review?
Top contender for the worst film of all time. We watched one of the worst films of all time a couple of weeks ago. Has he seen The Conqueror? I've seen a lot of bad movies, so to say that this is the top contender for worst film of all time is pretty, those are fighting words, sir. Paul 75. So here's another one written by Douglas Gillette, titled "I Don't See the Point." I didn't know it was a musical going in, so that was an unpleasant surprise. I'm okay with a well-done musical that explores the origins and motivation for each song, displaying it in context, but you don't get that in Rocketman. The songs were played during events that occurred before the song was written and sung by people who weren't even involved in writing the lyrics. So what's the point of that? Next is the story, or the 20 minutes of story between songs. This is not the story of Elton John. It's a story about a guy called Elton John. Put a pin in that. Everything is different to reality, so again, what's the point? If you're going to change primary characteristics of people you're portraying, e.g. Dick, change the name and everything else as well. Instead, this reeks of a propaganda piece by Elton, rewriting his role in some pretty crappy stuff that he did throughout his career, making him out to be a victim.
So, I feel like we devoted some serious audio time during this to deconstructing how people bursting into song as a way of underlining a point in the story is a central part of the musical. If you're having thoughts like this, you should slap yourself across the face with a banana peel numerous times.
I have a couple of questions here. First, I didn't know it was a musical going in, so that was an unpleasant surprise. I guess I get maybe not knowing that it is going to be a literal musical, because I think film advertising has done a tremendous disservice to the movie musicals that have been put out by kind of burying the lead of it being a musical. So if I give him that, which I'm going to be very generous here. What are your expectations about the ratio of song to dialogue if you are going to see a movie about Elton John, one of the most prolific singer-songwriters of the past 60 years?
Well, he provides no backup to convey that it was an inaccurate portrayal of Dick.
Is this someone who Elton John did harm to?
No, like maybe Douglas Gillick is actually John Reed, who doesn't like how he was portrayed in the movie.
It could be a relative of John Reed. Can I read one more really fast one because it's also amazing?
Yes, Sarah.
Okay, this is from C. Austin 16. Title, Please Give Me My Money Back. The most self-indulgent load of drivel I have seen in years. It's also a film that really didn't know what it wanted to be. Would have worked better, I feel, as a straight-out biopic without the musical element. Again, Elton John, one of the most prolific singer-songwriters of the past 60 years. And you don't want music in it. Okay.
Yeah, like if this guy had his way, there would be no music in any biopic of a musician. Like they would all be shot like Lincoln and nobody would sing.
Oh, goodness gracious. Do we have anything else to say about Rocketman? I mean, clearly it shouldn't have been a musical, but them's the breaks.
I loved it. Middle section of it, and it was a very enjoyable watch overall, and
I loved the heck out of this movie, and found it so delightful. And on that, if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We understand that it helps. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, or share about us on social media and how much you love us.
Thank you for hanging out with us again as we talked about Rocketman, and we hope we'll see you next time when, as the final feature in our Pride Month series, we will be talking about the 1998 HBO movie Gia, starring Angelina Jolie as the late supermodel Gia Karanji.
Spoiler alert. Boo.
Sarah did not like Gia, but have a great week, everyone.
Bye.